What if a single act of kindness could shatter the very foundation of your life? Imagine having everything money can buy, yet feeling a profound emptiness that no luxury can fill. This is a story about a young billionaire living in a gilded cage, and a homeless woman, with nothing but the secrets of her past. When their worlds collide on a rain-slicked city street, a simple offer of shelter unleashes a torrent of revelations, proving that the most valuable truths are not bought, but discovered. Prepare for a journey into the heart of a family mystery, where every memory is a clue, and the final twist will leave you breathless. Ethan Vance, at 35, was the sole heir to a tech fortune, a ghost rattling around a sterile, glass-walled mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. His parents, the brilliant minds behind a revolutionary software company, were stolen from him in a private jet crash when he was just 20. He inherited their empire, their wealth, and a crushing solitude that clung to him like the cold marble floors of his home. Across the glittering expanse of the Long Island Sound, in the canyons of Manhattan, Eleanor slept in doorways, a spectre ignored by the bustling city. She was a woman erased by time and tragedy, her life condensed into a single worn-out suitcase. The only thing she truly owned was a story that, unbeknownst to both of them, held the key to Ethan's past and the map to his future. The Tesla's autopilot navigated the slick, rain-lashed streets of Soho as Ethan stared out, unseeing. The city lights blurred into a watercolour of neon and sorrow. His life was a series of scheduled empty victories, board meetings, market gains, charity galas, where he smiled for cameras and felt nothing. The silence inside the car was as vast and oppressive as the one in his mansion. It was a loneliness so profound, it had its own weight. He manually took control of the car, a sudden urge to feel something, anything, guiding his hands. He turned down a quiet side street, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. That's when he saw her, a small figure huddled under the flimsy awning of a closed art gallery, trying to shield herself from the relentless downpour. Her face, illuminated for a brief second by his headlights, was etched with a quiet dignity that defied her circumstance. Something in him broke. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was a flicker of recognition, a pull he couldn't explain. He parked the car, its electric engine humming into silence. Grabbing an umbrella from the passenger seat, he stepped out into the cold New York night. The air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. As he approached, the woman, Eleanor, looked up. Her eyes weren't filled with the desperation he expected, but with a weary caution. They were a startling shade of blue, like a winter sky. He saw a painter's eyes, a soul that observes the world in shades and textures. "Ma'am," he began, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears, "it's a bad night to be out here. Can I help you?" He held out the umbrella. She flinched, a lifetime of mistrust in that small movement. But then she looked at his face, and for a reason she couldn't fathom, she didn't see a threat. She saw a deep, unyielding sadness that mirrored her own. "My name is Eleanor," she said, her voice a fragile whisper, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "I was evicted a few months ago. I don't have anyone." The words were simple, a plain statement of a devastating reality. Ethan felt the hollowness inside him ache. He had dozens of empty rooms, acres of manicured lawn, a garage bigger than most city apartments. The absurdity of his life struck him with the force of a physical blow. Without a second thought, the words tumbled out. "I have a guest house, over the garage. It's not being used. You could stay there, just until you get back on your feet." Eleanor stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. People like him didn't talk to people like her, let alone make such offers. "Why?" she asked, her gaze searching his. Ethan didn't have a practiced answer. "Because no one should have to endure this storm alone," he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said in years. The drive to Greenwich was silent, the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers marking the passage of miles and the crossing of invisible social boundaries. Eleanor sat in the plush leather seat, clutching her worn bag, a small island of destitution in an ocean of luxury. She watched the city's grit give way to the manicured perfection of the suburbs. When they pulled through the imposing iron gates of his estate, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The main house was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and steel, but it felt cold, like a museum. Ethan led her not to the house, but to a separate structure, a carriage house that had been converted into a stunning loft apartment. It had polished concrete floors, a small but gourmet kitchen, a wall of books, and a skylight that looked up at the turbulent, cloudy sky. It was more than a home. It was a sanctuary. "Here," Ethan said, his voice echoing slightly in the large open space. "There's a comfortable bed, a bathroom, a stock kitchen. Please make yourself at home."
Eleanor walked through the space, her hand lightly touching the cool surface of a marble countertop. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. For months, her world had been hard pavement and cold benches. This softness, this warmth, was overwhelming. She turned to him, the words of gratitude catching in her throat. He simply nodded, a flicker of a smile on his face. "There's no need to thank me," he said. "Get some rest, Eleanor." As he left, closing the door softly behind him, she stood in the centre of the room, listening to the rain drumming on the skylight. For the first time in a very long time, she felt safe. And in the main house, Ethan stood looking out at the rain, the crushing silence of his home feeling just a little bit less absolute. The days that followed settled into a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Eleanor, fiercely independent, insisted on maintaining the guest house herself. She would cook simple meals, the aroma of which would sometimes drift towards the main house, a ghost of domesticity Ethan hadn't experienced since he was a child. He, in turn, found himself drawn to her company. They would sometimes sit in the vast, manicured garden, drinking coffee and talking for hours. He was struck by her vast knowledge of art and music. She spoke of Monet's use of light, and Bach's counterpoint with a passion and insight that bespoke more than a casual interest. She saw the world through an artist's lens, finding beauty in the curve of a petal or the pattern of shadows on the lawn. She was slowly, carefully coming back to life, and Ethan found that her quiet presence was beginning to fill the empty spaces in his own. He learned that she had once been a painter, a rising star in the New York art scene decades ago, but when he asked why she stopped, a shadow would pass over her face, the light in her eyes would dim, and she would change the subject, her voice becoming tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "Some things are best left in the past, Ethan," she would say, and he learned not to push. He respected the walls she had built around her history, sensing they were there for protection, but his curiosity grew with each passing day. Who was this woman who could discuss Picasso with academic rigour, but flinched at the sound of a car backfiring? Who was the ghost she was running from? He felt a growing need to understand, not just for her sake, but for his own. Her mystery was a puzzle that distracted him from his own vacant existence. One afternoon, while Eleanor was tending to a small patch of herbs she had planted near the guest house, Ethan went into her apartment to drop off some groceries. He had never entered when she wasn't there, and it felt like an intrusion, but the door was slightly ajar. On a small table tucked away in a corner, he saw it, an old, leather-bound sketchbook. His heart pounded. He knew he shouldn't, but the temptation was too strong. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with breathtaking charcoal sketches, portraits mostly, faces of people on the street, each one capturing a lifetime of stories in a few deft strokes. They were not just drawings, they were acts of profound empathy. He saw sorrow, joy, defiance, and resignation. She had an almost supernatural ability to see into the soul of her subjects and lay it bare on the page. He felt as if he was looking at the secret history of the city. He flipped through the pages, mesmerized, until he reached the last drawing. His breath caught in his chest. It was a portrait of him. He was sitting in the garden, looking out towards the water, his expression unguarded and melancholic. She had captured the loneliness he tried so hard to hide from the world, the invisible weight he carried. She had seen him, truly seen him in a way no one else had. At that moment, Eleanor walked in. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide with alarm, seeing the open sketchbook in his hands. For a second, a look of pure panic crossed her face. "I'm sorry," he stammered,
closing the book. I shouldn't have. It's just... Eleanor, these are incredible. Why would you ever stop painting? The panic in her eyes was replaced by a deep, ancient sadness. Because the man who taught me to see the beauty in the world is the same one who tried to destroy it, she whispered, her voice trembling. That single, cryptic sentence hung in the air between them. Ethan knew he was on the precipice of her carefully guarded secret. He sat down, gesturing for her to join him. "Tell me, Eleanor," he said softly. "Tell me what happened." And so she began to talk. She spoke of a man named Vincent, a charismatic and powerful art dealer who had taken her under his wing when she was a young, promising artist. He was her mentor, her champion, and eventually her lover. He had a magnetic personality and an eye for talent, but beneath the polished veneer was a possessive, cruel man. "He didn't just want to represent my art," she explained, her gaze distant, lost in a painful memory. "He wanted to own it. He wanted to own me. He controlled who I saw, what I painted. My art, which had once been my freedom, became another bar in my cage." Her story unfolded, a chilling tale of psychological manipulation and artistic suffocation. Vincent's praise turned to criticism, his affection to control. He isolated her from friends and family, making her completely dependent on him. The breaking point came when she discovered his darkest secret. Vincent wasn't just a dealer, he was a master forger. He was selling brilliant fakes to unsuspecting collectors and museums, using his reputation to legitimize them. "When I confronted him," Eleanor continued, her hands trembling, "he showed me his true face. He told me that if I ever exposed him, he would ruin me. He would ensure I never painted again, that I would be nothing. He said he would erase me." She had tried to leave, but he was always one step ahead, his influence reaching into every corner of the art world. Fearing for her life, she did the only thing she could think of. She disappeared. She abandoned her name, her career, her entire life, and vanished into the anonymity of the streets. She stopped painting because every time she picked up a brush, she saw his face, heard his threats. He had successfully poisoned the one thing that gave her life meaning. Ethan listened, a cold fury building inside him. He had spent his life surrounded by a different kind of predator, corporate sharks and boardroom backstabbers, but this was a level of evil he found staggering. He looked at this brilliant, fragile woman and understood the depth of her trauma. "He didn't erase you, Eleanor," Ethan said, his voice firm with conviction. "You're still here, and your talent is still here." An idea, bold and clear, formed in his mind. "We're going to get it back. We're going to show them all." The plan was simple, yet audacious. Ethan would use his resources to set up a solo exhibition for her, a comeback. He converted a large, unused ballroom in his mansion into a professional-grade art studio, filling it with the finest canvases, paints and brushes money could buy. At first, Eleanor was hesitant, paralysed by decades of fear. Her hands shook when she held a brush. The blank canvas felt like an accusation. "I can't," she'd whisper, the ghost of Vincent's words echoing in her ears. Ethan was patient. He didn't push. He would simply sit with her in the studio, talking about art, reminding her of the passion she once had. He brought in books of her favourite artists, played the music that used to inspire her, and slowly, painstakingly, helped her chip away at the fortress of fear she had built around her heart. One day, she finally began to paint. The first strokes were tentative, unsure. But then, something broke free. Decades of suppressed creativity, of pain, of observation, poured out of her and onto the canvas. She painted with a feverish intensity, often working late into the night, fueled by coffee and a rediscovered purpose. Her style had changed. It was darker, more complex, but also more powerful than ever before. She painted the faces she had seen on the streets, imbuing them with a raw, heartbreaking humanity. She painted abstract landscapes of her inner turmoil, storms of colour and emotion, and she painted a series of haunting, shadowy portraits of a charismatic but menacing man, exorcising the demon of Vincent from her soul one brushstroke at a time. Ethan watched in awe as the studio filled with masterpieces. As the date of the exhibition approached, Ethan reached out to an old friend, Marcus Thorne, a respected art critic with a reputation for integrity. He invited him to the mansion for a private preview without revealing the artist's identity. Marcus walked through the makeshift gallery, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to stunned admiration. "Ethan, this is extraordinary," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The technique is masterful, but the emotional depth, it's staggering. Who is this artist? They paint like a ghost, someone who has seen the other side of life and come back." Ethan smiled. "Her name is Eleanor Vance," he said, intentionally using his own last name as a placeholder. He then led Marcus to the garden where Eleanor was waiting, her nerves palpable. When Marcus saw her, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Eleanor! Eleanor Shaw! My God, I thought you were dead." The reunion was emotional. Marcus had been a classmate of hers at NRISD, one of the few friends she'd had before Vincent had systematically cut everyone out of her life. They talked for hours, catching up on lost decades. Marcus was horrified to hear what had happened to her. "I always wondered," he said, his face grim. "Vincent told everyone you had a breakdown, that you'd run off to Europe. The man is a viper. He still runs the Soho gallery scene, more powerful than ever." The mention of his name made Eleanor flinch, but Marcus's presence seemed to fortify her. She had an ally, a witness from her former life. The exhibition was no longer just about reclaiming her art. It was about reclaiming her story, her name. The stage was being set for a confrontation that had been brewing for over 30 years. The night of the exhibition was a resounding success. Ethan had invited the elite of the New York art world, critics, collectors, and gallery owners. They walked through the gallery, whispering in awe, their champagne flutes forgotten. The name on everyone's lips was Eleanor Shaw. Her story, carefully curated by Marcus in the exhibition notes, was one of a brilliant artist lost and found, a phoenix rising from the ashes. Eleanor, dressed in a simple but elegant gown Ethan had bought for her, was terrified but resolute. She stood by his side, accepting compliments, the warmth of the praise a balm on old wounds. Then she saw him. Vincent. He was older, his charisma hardened into an arrogant swagger. But it was unmistakably him. He was making his way through the crowd, a smug smile on his face, heading straight for them. Vincent stopped in front of them, his eyes locking on Eleanor. His smile was a predatory slash. "Eleanor, my dear," he purred, his voice dripping with condescension. "To what do we owe this resurrection? I thought you'd given up this little hobby." Ethan stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Eleanor's arm. "She has every right to be here, Vincent. This is her night." Vincent's gaze shifted to Ethan, sizing him up. "Ah, the patron. There's always a rich boy willing to rescue a damsel in distress, but you don't know who you're dealing with, son." But Eleanor found her voice, clear and steady, amplified by the sudden hush that had fallen over the room. "I'm not a damsel, Vincent, and I'm not in distress. I'm an artist. Something you tried to take from me, something you could never understand." The confrontation turned the elegant party into a silent courtroom. All eyes were on them. "You were nothing without me," Vincent sneered. "I created you." "No!" Marcus's voice boomed from across the room. "You tried to destroy her, and you built your empire on lies." Marcus stepped forward, holding a tablet. On the screen was a detailed exposé he had just published online, complete with evidence of Vincent's forgeries, side-by-side comparisons, expert analysis, and even a sworn affidavit from a former assistant. He had been investigating Vincent for years, waiting for the right moment. Eleanor's return had been the catalyst. Vincent's face went pale. He looked around at the faces of the collectors he had swindled, their expressions turning from admiration to fury. "This is slander, lies," he sputtered, but his bluster was gone, replaced by a raw, cornered panic. As the crowd erupted in accusations, 2 uniformed police officers, tipped off by Ethan's security team, entered the gallery. They moved purposefully through the stunned guests and stopped on either side of Vincent, the smug art dealer who had ruled a world of beauty with ugly secrets, suddenly looked small and pathetic. As they cuffed him, his eyes found Eleanor's one last time. They were filled not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, the fear that had defined her life for decades finally gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength. The room broke into applause. It wasn't just for the art on the walls, it was for her survival. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, a wave of pride and relief washing over him. It was over. The ghost had been vanquished. In the quiet aftermath of Vincent's arrest, a new sense of peace settled over the estate. The world now knew Eleanor Shaw's name, and her art was in high demand. But for Eleanor, the victory was deeply personal. It was the closing of a painful chapter. Yet as one door closed, she knew another had to be opened. There was one last piece of her past she needed to confront, a truth far more profound and complex than Vincent's crimes. A week after the exhibition, as she and Ethan sat by the fireplace in the main house, a comfortable silence between them, she knew the time had come. Her heart ached with a mixture of love and terror. This final secret had the power to heal them both, or to break them completely. She took a deep breath, the flickering firelight casting shadows on her face. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "there's something else, something I should have told you from the beginning." He turned to her, his expression one of gentle concern. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to, Eleanor." She gave him a sad smile. "I am ready. I have to be." She paused, gathering her strength. "Before I met Vincent, I was married to a wonderful man. His name was Julian." Ethan felt an unexpected and irrational pang of jealousy. He tried to ignore it, focusing on her words. He knew she had a life before him, a life he couldn't imagine. He pictured this Julian, a kind man, a man worthy of the woman Eleanor must have been in her youth. He assumed he had died, another tragedy in her long, difficult life. He had no idea how central this man was to his own story. "He was the love of my life," she continued, her eyes glistening. "He was a musician, a composer. He saw the music in my colours, and I saw the art in his melodies. We were everything to each other." She looked into the fire, as if seeing their life together in the flames. "Vincent was obsessed with me, even then. He couldn't stand that I belonged to someone else. He saw Julian not as a person, but as an obstacle." A tear traced a path down her cheek. "The official story, the one I told everyone for years, was that Julian died in a car accident." She turned from the fire to look directly at Ethan, her gaze intense and full of pain. "That was a lie, Ethan. A lie I told to protect myself, to protect everyone. Julian didn't die in an accident, Vincent killed him." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Murder. The crime elevated Vincent from a manipulative con man to a monster. He felt sick. All this time, Eleanor had been carrying not just the weight of her own trauma, but the secret of her husband's murder. "He made it look like an accident," she said, her voice hollow. "He had the power, the connections. No one suspected. But I knew. He wanted me for himself, and he got rid of the one person standing in his way." Ethan reached out and took her trembling hand. "Eleanor, I am so sorry," he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine the hell you've lived through." He thought of his own parents, their lives cut short in an accident. He felt a sudden, profound connection to her loss, a shared grief that crossed the decades. "But that's not the whole story," she said, her grip on his hand tightening. Her voice dropped, becoming so quiet he had to lean in to hear it. "There's more. Something I've kept hidden from the entire world. Something that I was too afraid to even admit to myself for so long." Ethan looked into her tear-filled eyes, a strange sense of foreboding washing over him. The world seemed to shrink, the roaring fire and the grand room fading away until it was just the two of them, suspended in a moment of terrible significance. He could see a truth there, waiting to be spoken, a truth that felt both impossible and inevitable. He felt that same inexplicable pull he had felt on that rainy street in Soho, only 100 times stronger, as if his entire life had been leading to this single, shattering confession. When Julian died, she choked out, the words tearing from her throat. We had a son, a beautiful baby boy. Ethan's heart stopped. A son. She'd had a child. The thought was staggering. Where was he? What had happened to him? His mind raced with questions, but he remained silent, letting her speak. Vincent knew about him, she continued, her voice breaking. He threatened him. He told me if I didn't disappear, if I didn't let him control my life, he would hurt my son. He would make sure my baby suffered the same fate as his father. The horror of it was absolute. It was a choice no mother should ever have to make. To save her child, she had to lose him. It was an act of unimaginable sacrifice. I had no choice, she sobbed, the sound raw and broken. I had to protect him, so I gave him up. I arranged a private, closed adoption with a wonderful couple I knew I could trust. They were brilliant, kind people who couldn't have children of their own. I knew they would give him a better life, a safer life, than I ever could. I made them promise never to tell him. I thought it was the only way to keep him safe from Vincent's poison, to let him grow up free from the shadow of his father's murder. Ethan felt the floor drop out from beneath him. A closed adoption, a kind couple, an accident. The pieces of his life, the fragmented memories, and the gaping holes of his past began to violently rearrange themselves into a new, terrifying picture. He looked at her winter blue eyes, and suddenly he saw his own reflected in them. The couple, Ethan said, his voice a strangled whisper. Their names. Tell me their names. Eleanor looked at him, her face a mask of love and agony. Their names were Robert and Catherine Vance. Ethan recoiled as if he'd been struck. The names of his parents. The parents he had mourned his entire life. The ones he thought he came from. The jet crash. The inheritance. All of it was a story, but not the first one. Not the real one. He stared at her, at this woman he had pulled from the street, this artist, this friend, and he saw the truth. He saw the impossible, undeniable truth in the curve of her smile, in the shape of her hands, in the soul-deep connection he had felt from the very first moment. Julian was your father, Ethan, she said, her voice finally steady, as if speaking this truth had given her a strange sort of peace. The man Vincent murdered, and I am your mother. The words landed in the silent room with the force of an explosion. Mother. The word was alien on his tongue, a concept he had consigned to old photographs and vague, childish memories. He looked at Eleanor, the homeless woman from the gallery, the brilliant artist, the survivor. He saw the years of pain etched on her face, the decades of silent love and sacrifice. His loneliness was not a random tragedy. It was the result of a calculated act of evil and an incredible act of love. He wasn't an orphan. He was a son who had been protected, a secret who had been kept safe. Tears streamed down his face, not of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shattering recognition. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. He finally understood. The void in his life wasn't about the money or the empty mansion. It was the missing piece of his own story. The pull he felt towards her wasn't just compassion. It was the primal, unspoken bond between a mother and her child, a connection that had survived decades of separation, tragedy, and silence. He reached for her, his hands shaking, and pulled her into his arms. He held her tightly, the way a lost child holds onto their parent, trying to make up for a lifetime of missed embraces in one single moment. She sobbed against his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head, burying his face in her hair. "There's nothing to forgive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You gave me life and then you saved it. Thank you, Mom." In that moment, in the warmth of the firelight, two broken halves became whole. The billionaire found a treasure greater than his entire fortune, and the homeless artist reclaimed her greatest creation, her son. Their story is a powerful reminder that family isn't just about blood, but about the unbreakable bonds forged in sacrifice and love. It shows us that even in the darkest of storms, an act of kindness can be the lighthouse that guides us home. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe is the most powerful sacrifice a person can make for love?